Hello, my holy sisters and brothers. Wow, Yom Kippur is almost upon us. It is Erev Yom Kippur right now. Today we all do an early mincha, an early afternoon service, where we begin already to modify the daily prayers for Yom Kippur. Then we enjoy the pre-Yom Kippur meal. And it's important to do that. That's actually part of the observance of Yom Kippur. And we enter that 25-hour fast, and we afflict ourselves, and we confess our sins. And with God's help, we achieve an expiation, an atonement. And over those 25 hours, we climb higher and higher and higher. It's a wonderful, wonderful day because, you think, oh, Yom Kippur, it's terrible. We're fasting. We're all involved in our transgressions. But because we know our Father in heaven loves us and will forgive our sins against our Creator, it is also a very uplifting time. And by the time of Nila, the final service on the Yom Kippur day, the fasting usually turns into a time of tremendous meaning and uplift. May you be inscribed and sealed for a good decree for the coming year. Let's light up the darkness. And in a moment, something that we do on this day, Erev Yom Kippur, is kapara, right? It's also plural kaparos. No, I am not going to slaughter a chicken right here on camera. It's perfectly valid to do kaparos with money. So I'm going to do the kaparos ceremony in one moment after I welcome our friends. And if you haven't done it already, you can watch how it's done. Very simple ceremony. And many people would prefer to do it with money over the rooster. Though some do the traditional way of slaughtering a rooster. But you'll see how it's done with money momentarily. Okay, who's here with us today? Yehuda in South Carolina, wishing that everybody should be sealed in the book of life for health, blessings, good things, and peace. John in Maine, Bill in Mid-Missouri, Guy in Dayton, Bella in Florida, Paula in the Great Northwest, Yosef in Massachusetts, Renee in Indiana, Shandor in the Bronx, Melissa in Texas, Sharon in New Jersey, Belle is wishing everybody a beautiful wish, and everyone is saying Amen. And over there on the YouTube side, Yitzhak in Kansas City, Lynn in North Texas, Aoife in Florida. All right, let's do kapara. There's two paragraphs that you read, and you read them each 3 times. For the sake of efficiency here, I've already read the first paragraph twice while I was preparing for the show. So I am now doing the third reading, but you have to read it 3 times. All right, so I'm going to be using this little bit of money right here as my kapara. Okay, so you say, children of man who sit in darkness and the shadow of death, bound in misery and chains of iron, he will bring them out of darkness and the shadow of death and will sunder their bonds. Foolish sinners, afflicted because of their sinful ways and their wrongdoings, their soul loathes all food and they reach the gates of death. They cry out to the Lord in their distress. He saves them from their afflictions. He sends forth his word and heals them. He delivers them from their graves. Let them thank the Lord for his kindness and proclaim his wonders to the children of man. If there be for a man even one interceding angel out of 1,000 accusers to speak of his uprightness in his behalf, then he will be gracious to him and say, redeem him from going down to the grave. I have found expiation for him. Okay, and then we if this was a rooster, we would, wave the rooster over our heads, but we do it with money. This is my exchange. This is my substitute. This is my expiation. This rooster shall go to its death, and I shall proceed to a good long life and peace. This is my exchange. This is my substitute. This is my expiation. This rooster shall go to its death, and I shall proceed to a good long life and peace. This is my exchange. This is my substitute. This is my expiation. This rooster shall go to its death, and I shall proceed to a good long life and peace. and I'll put this money aside and give it to tzedakah, give it to charity. And that's it. That's kapara. And it's actually a ceremony very ancient and links sort of the post-temple era to the temple era, right? And when the temple was standing, so then there would be the goat for Azazel, that was sent into the wilderness and sacrificed, from which is the origin, of course, of the word scapegoat. Since the temple was destroyed, we don't have that, but our tradition developed this custom of doing kapara on ideally you do it at dawn on this day, Erev Yom Kippur, but I wanted to share it with you, my friends. Okay, today's episode of AT Daily is sponsored by Mickey Stein, who says, please dedicate an episode of AT Daily to a real tzaddik, a real righteous man, and a fellow Levite, so my fellow Levite as well, my cousin, Mickey's cousin, Samuel ben Mordechai Levy. He worked his whole life for the betterment of others, refusing to take money or payment of any kind for the thousands of good deeds he did to advance not only Jews, but our whole community. He was the definition of a tzaddik. May his neshama, may his soul have a great aliyah, a great elevation in the world of souls. We say amen. And Mickey, thank you for enabling us to share more Torah with more people around the world. May you and all your loved ones be showered in blessings and inscribed in the book of life for a great decree in this coming year, 5783. We also dedicate our learning today to my mom, Babet bat Yoel. May her memory always be for a blessing. All right. Today we are concluding, with God's help, chapter 9. We open on page 90. Our daf is page 90, page Tzadi. And this is, we're going to be doing Mishnah number 8 of chapter 9. It's a short Mishnah and a short Gemara. And then we complete chapter 9 and open chapter 10 today with this page 90. We are in Tractate Kesubos, the 15th volume of the Talmud. Today, this chapter 9 that we're completing was about the rights of a husband under the ketubah. And whether he can waive some of those rights under the ketubah and what happens then. And then we'll get into chapter 10, where, from a legalistic point of view, we deal with issues that arise when a man has multiple wives. This has been prohibited for 1,000 years, but previously it was permitted, and it would create issues of paying the ketubah and inheritance law. Okay, Mishnah number 8 here at the end of chapter 9, Tractate Kesubos. In the case of a minor who was married off by his father, right? A young boy who was married, right? His family married him to a woman or a girl, let's say. So in the case of a minor who was married off by his father, the wife's marriage contract, or ketubah, that the minor wrote is valid even after the husband comes of age. He cannot excuse himself by saying that the ketubah was drafted when he was still a minor, as it is on this condition, the terms of the ketubah, that he maintained her as his wife upon his maturity. As soon as he became, he didn't end the marriage before he became an adult. So once he became an adult and he's still in the marriage, it's on the basis of this ketubah that he wrote when he was still a minor. So similarly, in the case of a convert whose wife converted with him, the marriage contract that she had as a Gentile is valid, for on this condition he maintained her as his wife. They didn't divorce before and remarry. They remained married as they converted, and so whatever contract she had before the conversion went through remains in effect. That's Mishnah number 8. So what did we just learn? That if this minor boy is married and he wrote a marriage contract before the marriage, and then he becomes an adult, that marriage contract remains valid. Seems like a pretty straightforward teaching, but if that's what we're thinking the Mishnah said, we'd be mistaken. We would be misled like Rav Yehuda was misled, as we shall see. Here's the Gemara. Rav Huna said they taught that the wife of a minor or a convert receives payment only with regard to the main sum, right? The rabbinically decreed sum that all husbands must give to their wives, 100 dinars if she's not a virgin, 200 dinars if she is a virgin when she enters the marriage. Only this the minor is still liable to give. But if he wrote a marriage contract that had additional sums, greater sums, he is not liable to pay for that, because when he entered that contract, he was a minor, and a minor cannot enter a binding contract. Right, so Rav Huna said they taught that the wife of the minor or convert receives payment only with regard to the main sum of 100 dinars or 200 dinars. However, she does not have the right to receive the additional sum that he wrote in her marriage contract, because this document is not legally binding, as it was written by a minor. She receives the main sum only as a result of an ordinance instituted by the sages. And Rav Yehuda said, no, she does get the additional sum. Now, the Gemara raises an objection against the opinion of Rav Yehuda. Rav Yehuda seems to be reading the Mishnah the way we would read it, the straightforward meaning. But the Gemara is saying, no, Rav Yehuda, you're wrong. And what is the proof? If a minor came of age or a Gentile who converted, then introduced an additional sum to the marriage contract, she takes the additional sum that they introduced, meaning he can add to the marriage contract after he comes of age, and then that will be legally binding. But any amounts that he commits to before he comes of age, before he's an adult, is not binding. That's contrary to Rabbi Yehuda's understanding. And the Gemara infers from this, yes, the woman receives what they introduced after he became an adult. However, if they did not introduce an additional sum, she does not collect, even if it was written in the original marriage contract, because he was a minor when he wrote that. Now, the Gemara refutes this proof. Whoa. Say that this means that she takes even that which they introduced, in addition to the entire amount of the original marriage contract. That's what Rabbi Yehuda would say. The Gemara asks, but the Tana did not teach this. And the continuation of the Baraisa states the opposite. If they introduced a new sum, she takes the additional sum, that which they introduced. If they did not introduce a new sum, a virgin collects 200 dinars and a widow 100 dinars. She does not collect any additional sum that was listed in the original marriage contract written when the boy was a minor. This provides a conclusive refutation of the statement of Rav Yehuda, whose opinion is therefore rejected. And the Gemara explains Rav Yehuda was misled by the language of the Mishnah, and he reached an incorrect conclusion. He thought that the phrase, her marriage contract is valid, that this phrase is referring to the entire matter, the entire sum of the marriage contract that the boy wrote when he was still a boy. But that is not so, as it is referring only to the main sum of the marriage contract that was established by the sages, and not to any additional sum. That concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 8, the final Mishnah of chapter 9. And now we turn the page and we open chapter 10 here in Tractate Kesubos. Here is Mishnah number 1, and in this chapter we're discussing what happens if a man had more than one wife, and how does this impact the law of ketubah, the law of inheritance, and other related laws. Mishnah number 1. In the case of one who was married to two women, and he died, the first woman that he married precedes the second in collecting the payment specified in her marriage contract if there are insufficient funds to pay both, because her document is dated earlier. So just, quickly unpack that. Man had two wives, right? So whenever a Jewish man marries a Jewish woman, and in ancient times they could marry more than one woman, so each woman receives her own ketubah. Minimum amount in the ketubah is going to be 200 dinars if she's a virgin, 100 if she's not. So if he should then die, making both of them a widow, if his estate has enough money to pay the ketubah payments to each of the wives, great. So they get paid what they're owed and there's no problem. But if he leaves an estate that is too small to pay the ketubah payments of both women, then the first thing we're learning here, Mishnah number 1, is that the earlier wife, the first wife, gets paid first, right? Now, they were both widowed at the same time, right? So it would not be like a modern situation where he might have two wives, but he wouldn't have been married to them at the same time, because if he was married to his first wife, and then, she wouldn't be widowed, because then obviously he couldn't have married his second wife. He might have divorced the first wife, but then he would have, paid the ketubah payment then, and then he married the second one and widowed her. And those kinds of cases we'll examine also. But really we're talking about the ancient situation where both wives became a widow at the same time. Then the one that he married first, if he didn't marry them on the same day, which is likely, it's unlikely that he would have married them at the same time. So the one he married first is going to take precedence. Why? Because her ketubah came into existence first, and so it's going to take precedence. So too, if the wives died after their husband, but before they received payment of their marriage contracts, so he died, he left two widows. Now, before the estate settled with the widows died. So now, who does the estate owe money to? To the children of the widows, right? The heirs of the first wife and the heirs of the second wife. And likewise, if the estate is insufficient to pay the ketubah payments to all the heirs of the first wife take precedence over the heirs of the second wife. If he married a first woman and then she died, and then he married a second woman. Okay, now this could happen in modern times, right? A man was married, tragically his wife died, and then he remarried. And then he married a second woman, and then he died, right? So the only person that's left is the widow, right? He married a woman, she died, then he married a second wife, and he died. So all that's left is that second wife who's now a widow. So in this case, the second wife and her heirs precede the heirs of the first wife. Why? Right? In the first case, when the man died and left two widows simultaneously, the first wife takes precedence. Even if both wives died, the heirs of the first wife take precedence. But if he was married and then she died, and then he was married again and then he died, now if the estate hasn't settled up with the first wife yet, and why she died first, right? So it's not a ketubah payment that he owes her. What is it that he owes her? Under the terms of the ketubah, he owes support to her children. That's what's owed. And to the second wife, what does he owe? Well, he died, so he owes the normal ketubah payment because he died leaving a widow, right? So in this case, the second wife and her heirs precede the heirs of the first wife. And this is because the marriage contract of the second wife is considered a debt that the estate of the deceased is required to pay, whereas the claim of the heirs of the first wife is based on the stipulation in the marriage contract that male children inherit their mother's marriage contract. Heirs receive their share of the estate only from property that remains after all debts have been settled. So the estate in that situation has to pay the ketubah payment of the existing wife at the time that the man died. And then if there's money left over, it'll look to pay the heirs of the first wife who died. That's the Mishnah. Here's the Gemara. From the fact that it teaches the first woman he married precedes the second in collecting the payment of her marriage contract, and it does not teach simply that the first woman has the right to receive payment of her marriage contract and the second does not have that right, the Mishnah thereby teaches, by inference, that if the second preceded the first and seized the property in payment of her marriage contract, we do not expropriate it from her because her rights to the property are not completely canceled. Very interesting, and this is going to be related to a similar law of lenders and debtors, right? So if somebody lent money to, if several lenders lent money to one borrower, right, and then the borrower died, leaving some assets, okay? So we've just learned that the lender with the earliest loan agreement should have some kind of precedence over the lenders with later loan agreements. But according to what we just heard, if one of the lenders with a later date loan agreement seized assets in order to secure the debt, then what they seized is seized, right? The earlier lender should have a prior right to the property, but the later lenders still have a right. And if they seized property, then they're able to keep it in order to fulfill the debts of the borrower. It's very interesting, right? As long as you have a valid right, you sort of create this situation where lenders, are going to race each other to seize assets. And that's probably quite real world. We do not expropriate from her. And the Gemara suggests, learn from the Mishnah the following principle. In the case of a creditor holding a promissory note dated later than the notes of other creditors who preceded the later creditors and collected the earlier creditors and collected his debt, so whatever he collected, he has collected, and it is not expropriated from him, even if the debtor does not have the means to pay back all his creditors. Right? First creditor to seize property wins. Now, the Gemara rejects this conclusion. Actually, I will say to you that what he collected, he has not collected. Right? If he doesn't have that precedence, he doesn't have the right to race in and collect. I.e., he must restore the property to the debtor so that the latter can pay the other creditors or the debtor's estate. And what does the Mishnah mean when it teaches that the first wife precedes the second? It teaches that the first wife completely precedes the second. Now, this is a situation where there were simply two wives that were widowed at the same moment when the man died. And we say that the first wife has precedence over the second. So now, if the second wife, the later wife, seizes the assets, right? In the first explanation, we heard, well, if the second wife seizes the assets, even though she doesn't take precedence, now that she's got them, we're not going to pull them away from her. But the Gemara is rejecting that explanation and saying, no. Since the first wife takes precedence, if the later wife, who became widowed at the same time, but the one who was married later, if she seizes the limited assets of the husband who died, then we take them away from her and shift them to the wife with the earlier ketubah because she takes precedence. He must restore the property to the debtor. And what does the Mishnah teach when it teaches that the first wife precedes the second? It teaches that the first wife completely precedes the second, is granted exclusive rights to collect the payment of her marriage contract. How do we know this? As we learned in a Mishnah in Bava Basra, page 115a, a son precedes a daughter in matters of inheritance. Were she to come and take part of the inheritance, it would not become hers. The son completely precedes her, so that in cases where there is a male heir, the daughter receives nothing. So the same understanding of the word precedes applies in this matter as well. Since the first wife with the earlier ketubah precedes the second wife with the later ketubah, if the second wife seized assets, we take them away from her and give them to the wife with the earlier ketubah. This is in the case where there's not enough funds to pay them both. Now, there are those who say that the discussion was a little different, and it went like this. From the fact that our Mishnah does not teach if the second wife preceded the first wife and seized property, it is not expropriated from her. This proves by inference that if the second wife preceded the first and seized property as payment for her marriage contract, we do appropriate it from her. And the Gemara suggests, learn from the Mishnah the following rule. In the case of a creditor holding a promissory note dated later than the notes of other creditors who preceded the other creditors and collected his debt, whatever he collected, he has not collected, i.e. it is expropriated from him and given to the lenders with earlier promissory notes. But now the Gemara is going to reject this second understanding. Actually, I will say to you that what the later creditor collected, he has collected. But since the Mishnah taught later, the second wife and her heirs precede the heirs of the first, so that even if the heirs of the first, right, the second case of our Mishnah was not where the two women became a widow at the same time and one had an earlier ketubah. Rather, the second clause of our Mishnah is where there was an earlier wife and she died. Okay, so the husband retains an obligation to, give that his ketubah payment is now inherited by her sons. Okay, that is the law, that if a woman dies first, her ketubah payment passes to her heirs. But this is different than his obligation to the second wife, because the second wife when the man dies first, so now she has a claim on his estate for her direct ketubah payment to her. Right? And so from this, we learn, and there the Mishnah said that in that case, the second wife takes precedence over the first. So I will say to you that what the later creditor collected, he has collected, but since the Mishnah taught later, the second wife and her heirs precede the heirs of the first wife, so that even if the heirs of the first wife seize property, they do not legally acquire it, and it is expropriated from them because they are collecting an inheritance rather than a debt. It taught the first clause as well with the same wording. The first woman precedes the second, without elaborating that the property would not be expropriated from the second if she were to seize it in payment of her marriage contract. Now we're on page 90b. So the Mishnah taught, if he married the first woman, etc., right? The second clause of the Mishnah. He married the first, and then she died, then he married another, and then he died. Okay? Now, from the fact that it teaches... so in that second clause, we learn three things. Conclude three conclusions from this statement. Number one, conclude from it that if one of the man's wives died in his lifetime and the other one died following his death, then the sons of the first wife are entitled to collect the marriage contract concerning male children, and we are not concerned that this would lead to quarreling. Now the Gemara asks, from where is it known that this is correct? From the fact that it teaches, and we're on 90b now, from the fact that it teaches the second wife and her heirs precede the heirs of the first wife, it can be inferred that they precede the heirs of the first. But if there are enough funds in the estate for all the claims against it, then the children of the first wife do take their share of the dowry. Now, the second point that one can conclude from the second clause of our Mishnah is this. That one marriage contract becomes surplus for the other. What does this mean? The sages ruled that each son may claim his mother's marriage settlement only when the value of the estate exceeds the sum total of the marriage contracts by at least 1 dinar, so that the biblical laws of inheritance can be fulfilled. Since the marriage settlement collected by the heirs of the second wife is considered a debt owed by the estate, this sum is considered to have been paid equally by all the heirs. The biblical laws of inheritance have thereby been fulfilled, and the sons of the first wife can claim the marriage contract concerning male children, even if nothing will be left in the estate after they have collected their payment. So as we see, in that case, he had a wife who died, then he had another wife, and he died. Right, so the first thing that happens is the estate pays the ketubah payment of the wife who was alive at the time of the death of the husband. That goes to her. If she then dies after he does, it goes to her heirs. After that is satisfied, then we look back to the first ketubah, which probably hasn't been paid already. That's why we're talking about it. That woman died, but her sons inherited that ketubah payment, and so now they get paid. So the Gemara asks, from where is it known that this is correct? And the Gemara answers, from the fact that it does not teach in the Mishnah if there is a surplus of a dinar in addition to the value of all the marriage contracts. And conclude from it, from that second clause of the Mishnah, a third point. That when one collects the payment for the marriage contract concerning male children, he cannot seize liened property that his father sold to others as one can when collecting a debt. That's a big difference between the claims of the second wife and her heirs and the first wife who died first and the claim of her heirs, right? So if a husband dies, and just a simple case, there was a man and a woman, one husband, one wife, he dies, okay? She's now a widow, she's entitled to her ketubah payment. There's not enough money in the estate. But there was a field that was sold, which would be enough money to satisfy her ketubah payment. It was sold to a third party. She can seize that field because she had a prior lien. All of a husband's property is mortgaged there's a lien on it to pay her ketubah payment. So if it was sold in his lifetime, it was improperly sold if there's not going to be enough money to pay her ketubah payment, so she can go seize it from that third party. That third party is going to be out of luck. Now, she can do that for her ketubah payment. However, for this obligation towards the first wife, the earlier wife who preceded the husband in death, she died first. He had an obligation to pay her ketubah payment to her sons, to her heirs, but they cannot seize a field that has been mortgaged, that has been sold to a third party. Where am I? Who cannot repossess property sold by their father. Now, Rav Ashi objects to two of the three conclusions that we just stated. Says Rav Ashi, from where is it known that all of this is correct? Perhaps I could actually say to you that if one wife died in his lifetime and another wife died following his death, then no one is entitled to collect the marriage contract concerning male children. Meaning that the husband still owes the ketubah payment to a wife. If she dies, it just passes the obligation to her sons. Maybe nobody is going to receive that. To collect the marriage concerning male children. And what does the Mishnah mean when it says precede? It does not mean that if there are enough assets remaining, the sons of the first wife receive the sum of their mother's marriage settlement. Rather, says Rav Ashi, it is teaching that after the sons of the second wife receive the sum of their mother's marriage settlement, the sons from both marriages inherit equal shares of the remaining estate. Remember, they're entitled to money as their mother's sons to receive the ketubah payment, but they are also the sons of this man, of this father. And so as his sons, they're going to inherit the estate. After the estate pays, let's say the ketubah payment of the second wife who's still alive when he dies, then all the sons split the remaining estate. Seems like a pretty good point from Rav Ashi. And if you would say that if the Mishnah is referring to the inheritance of the remainder of the estate, why do I need the Mishnah to mention the heirs of the first wife? Since it is teaching a law concerning their inheritance from their father and not their inheritance from their mother, why refer to them as the heirs of the first wife? One could reply that since the Mishnah taught the second wife and her heirs, the Mishnah also taught the parallel phrase, the heirs of the first wife. But no legal conclusions should be drawn from that wording. And concerning what you said, that one marriage contract becomes surplus for the other, this too can be rejected, says Rav Ashi. Perhaps I could actually say to you that one marriage contract does not become surplus for the other. And the case under discussion here is where there's a surplus of an additional dinar. And the reason why it was not explicitly mentioned is because it is not the subject of our Mishnah. So Rav Ashi asks some pretty good questions that undermine our whole understanding that the Gemara has explained how the Mishnah works. So the Gemara answers, note that in the case where one wife died in his lifetime and one died following his death, there is a dispute between Tanaim, right? Rabbis of the Mishnah. If the sons of the wife who died in her husband's lifetime are entitled to collect their mother's marriage settlement, as it is taught in a Baraisa. If they died, one in his lifetime and one following his death, our situation, right? The two wives died, one in his lifetime and the other one following his death. So they are heirs of the first wife who died while the husband was still alive, and they are heirs of the second wife who was widowed and then she died. So the sons of the first wife can say to the sons of the second wife, you are the children of a creditor. So you collect your mother's marriage contract and leave. And we will inherit the rest of the estate due to the marriage contract concerning the male children. So Rabbi Akiva says, when the husband died, the inheritance already eluded the sons of the first wife and came into possession of the sons of the second wife as an inheritance. In other words, the sages did not institute the marriage contract concerning male children in a case where one of the wives was alive when the husband died. Consequently, after the sons of the second wife collect their mother's marriage settlement, the remainder of the estate is divided evenly between all of the man's sons, which seems to be what Rav Ashi was saying. Now the Gemara comments, what is it not that they disagree about this? One sage, Ben Nanas, holds that in a case where one wife died in his lifetime and one died following his death, the first wife's sons are entitled to collect the marriage contract concerning male children. And the other sage, Rabbi Akiva, holds that in a case where the one wife died in his lifetime and one died following his death, the first wife's sons are not entitled to collect the marriage contract concerning male children. Rabbah said, I found the sages of the school of Rav sitting and saying, everyone agrees that in a case where one wife died in his lifetime and one died following his death, the first wife's sons are entitled to collect the marriage contract concerning male children. Here, however, they disagree with regard to the question of whether or not one marriage contract becomes surplus for the other, in a case where there is no surplus of an additional dinar with which to fulfill the biblical laws of inheritance. And the same is true with regard to payment made to a creditor, i.e., they disagree whether paying a creditor of their father is sufficient fulfillment of the biblical laws of inheritance to allow collection of the marriage contract concerning male children. So one sage, Ben Nanas, holds that one marriage contract becomes surplus for the other, and the same is true with regard to payment made to a creditor. And the other sage, Rabbi Akiva, holds that one marriage contract does not become surplus for the other, and the same is true with regard to the debt owed to a creditor. So Rabbah continues, and I said to them, with regard to payment made to a creditor, everyone agrees that it is considered surplus and fulfills the biblical laws of inheritance, even given the lien attached to it. And when they disagree, it is with regard to whether a marriage contract can be considered surplus. So Rav Yosef objects. If that is so, then why did it say in the Baraisa that Rabbi Akiva says the inheritance already eluded them? Rather, it should have said, if there is a surplus of a dinar, since that is the actual focal point of the disagreement. So rather, Rav Yosef said, they disagree with regard to the basic issue of whether the sages instituted the marriage contract concerning male children, meaning that if a wife dies before her husband, so he had an obligation to pay her ketubah if he died first. Now that she died first, he still has that obligation, but now it's owed to her male children. If she didn't have male heirs, then this ketubah payment will never be paid at all. But if she did have male heirs, now the ketubah payment is owed to the male heirs. When is it owed? When is it owed? We're not sure about that. I think it's not owed until he dies, right? But at that time, it would go to her male heirs. So Rav Yosef said, they disagree with regard to the basic issue of whether the sages instituted the marriage contract concerning the male children in a case where one wife died in his lifetime and the other died following his death, as was explained initially. And these Tanaim who are arguing, Ben Nanas on the one side and Rabbi Akiva on the other, they are like those other Tanaim who debated this very same point, as it is taught in a Baraisa. So another two set of sages arguing about the same issue. In that Baraisa it says, if he married a first woman and she subsequently died, and then he married a second woman and he died. So the sons of the second wife come after her death and collect payment of their marriage contract if she did not collect it while she was alive, while the rest of the estate is distributed equally between all the sons. And Rabbi Shimon says, if there is a surplus of a dinar, right, so there's enough to satisfy all debts, then these sons of the first wife collect their mother's marriage contract, namely the marriage contract concerning male offspring. And these sons of the second wife, they collect their mother's marriage contract, and if not, they divide the entire estate equally among themselves. I should have warned you. That's it. We're done. I hope you have comments or questions. Should have said, and I'm almost done. So I'll just stall a little bit while I am loading this document with which Nina passes me the questions on page 90. Here we go. Says Sharon, it seems grossly unfair that one wife receives full payment and the second wife potentially gets nothing of her ketubah payment rather than proportional payment. What protection then does the ketubah offer to the second wife? So you're talking about the first case where if there was not enough money to pay both wives, that the first wife, the wife who married earlier, precedes the second. I'm kind of agreeing with you, Sharon. Why not say if their funds are limited, so then whatever is left, the two wives who were widowed at the same moment split evenly? Wouldn't that make more sense? But it's not that way. I guess one argument could be, well, the first wife was married with him longer. Maybe, in the normal course of things, she might have more children to feed than the second wife would. But since the whole idea was to protect the wife in the event that the husband dies, it seems like both of them need equal protection, and for some reason they don't get it. I can't explain it. Tom, what if many years intervene between the death of the first wife and the death of the husband? How long are her sons supposed to wait for their inheritance? They haven't explained that. It seems like they don't get it until the man dies. But this is only the inheritance of the ketubah payment, right? And that's why we've been discussing that those sons, that was just something that they were owed under the mother's ketubah, but they're still sons of the man, right? So if there's a large estate, okay, well, you don't inherit anything from your father while he's alive. It's only when he dies that you inherit from your father. So they might get some additional sum under their mother's ketubah at that time. But really, it's just that all the sons are going to inherit their father when the father dies after the estate has paid off its debts. And that's why the living wife, the living widow, she receives her ketubah payment right away from the estate. And then if she died, that's where the sons of the second wife, who was living at the time that the man died, have this advantage over the sons from the earlier marriage. Sharon, why should they be entitled at all before he dies? My mother predeceased my dad. I didn't inherit anything until my dad died. Right? Exactly. Makes sense to me. Okay, my friends, that's what I've got for us today. May we all be blessed with a meaningful, that's the first thing, meaningful, uplifting Yom Kippur. We're going to be, it's just, where did I see this yesterday? I think it was on an Aish email. Judaism does not really have a concept of sin the way that word is defined in the culture outside of Judaism. Of course, we're talking about that we confess our sins. What is the vidui? We confess our sins. But what we're really confessing is our, what's the word? An avera, that means transgression. Like we went outside the bounds. Or a chet, right? That means that we missed the mark, right? And so there's this idea, who are we? We are all souls, right? We are all, eternal creatures who are a part of the Holy One above. And we're sent into this mysterious world to live a life and hopefully fulfill our mission in human form. And part of living that mission is amnesia, right? We don't remember who we really are. We forget that soul identity we had before we come here. A soul is an absolutely pure thing. And while we're here, the demands of this world, the demands of the body, the demands of the evil inclination cause us to miss the mark, to overstep the bounds, to do terrible things. We're not saying that these transgressions and oversteppings are to be minimized. We do terrible things in this world, but it's not our true nature. And when we fast for these 25 hours and lift up our prayers, often in song, and we even isn't it amazing? For the sin that we did and the other sin that we did. We're singing about our sins. Why would we do that? Because we are sure that our Father in heaven understands who we really are, and accepts our apology to him. For the sins against people, we have to apologize to them. But for the sins against our Maker, we're apologizing on Yom Kippur, and that apology is going to be accepted because he knows who we really are. And so the beauty of Yom Kippur is that it's an opportunity for us to remember who we really are, right? We are souls. We are made of light. And eventually we'll return to that form when we leave this world. But while we're here and we, on Yom Kippur and over those 25 hours have a chance to experience ourselves as we really are, souls, beings made of light who want to cleave to their Maker, it's a beautiful reminder, beautiful opportunity to plug into who we really are And we can come out of Yom Kippur energized and perhaps with greater clarity about who we are and what our mission is in this world. And you should be so blessed to have that experience on Yom Kippur. All the best, my holy sisters and brothers.